Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit, and welcome to this conversation. I'm joined today by Ari Felix for a very juicy, very psychedelic conversation. And like many of you, I have always identified with being a dreamer and with being a world builder. And while some of these skills of dreaming, of building worlds out of our dreams, are truly innate to us as humans, I found it so helpful to have a mentor who can help me conceptualize and understand the principles energetically of what it is that I do when I am world building and how I can world build with more skill and more effectiveness, more impact, and maybe even more efficiency. And being in Ari's containers and working with them throughout 2023 has just been such a delightful and life-changing experience for me. And we discussed about all of that during this conversation. We also discussed about the principles of world building, specifically through the lens of the planetary ancestors. We talked about what it means to facilitate an inner enthusiasm for world building and how that connects to putting your direct experience at the center of your world building endeavors. It is such a rich and multi-layered conversation, and if you consider yourself to be a world builder, a visionary, I believe that this conversation will nourish you deeply. It's a conversation that feels so affirming to me, so fortifying to the parts of me that orient to this life as an artist of my own reality. If you're curious to go deeper with Ari's work, I encourage you to check out Worldbuilding School, which is currently open for enrollment and begins on January 20th, 2024, when Pluto enters Aquarius. And as always, all of the links will be in the show notes below. Before we get into it, let me read you Ari's bio. Ari Felix, aka the Dream Mami, or papi if you're nasty, specializes in crafting dreamworld language and world-building frameworks that emanate from the heart. As a writer, astrologer, and world-building coach, their mission is to empower mystics, artists, and creators to unlock their world-creating potential. Ari believes that one's clearest desires are prophecies capable of materializing, drawing inspiration from ancient sun delineations. Through experimental containers and transmutational experiences, Ari leaves individuals feeling radiant and prepared to embrace creative risks. With over a decade of experience, they have collaborated with spiritual practitioners, radical leaders, healers, and artists of all kinds. Here's my conversation with Ari Felix. Welcome to the podcast, Ari. Thank you so much for being here. I've been waiting for this moment for a while, so it feels like a dream come true.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I was reflecting on your work and your presence right before you came on, and something that I thought about with you was specifically how I perceive this beautiful kind of completeness in your work, in a sense that you're radical as fuck, you're very psychedelic, but I feel like you also steward this work with so much ferocity and so much heart and sweetness and devotion, and you're also so playful. And I've been pretty much working pretty intensely with you the past year or so, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like you really provide this um, medicine of deep care, deep seeing, and affirmation, but you also call people in, and I feel like throughout our work together, like you were definitely like an energetic acupuncturist a little bit, like kind of giving guidance on like what to explore, what pathways to open up. And so yeah, I've just been so grateful for your work. And you have always been present in my kind of peripheral vision for a while. I know that, we were connected through some of the same people, but yeah, I feel like this latest iteration of your work has just been so resonant with where I am currently, what kind of guidance I need, what I need to learn about. And
Mm.
yeah, so thank you for the courage to really step into this work. Hmm.
Mm. Thank you so much for that. That's such a good reflection to receive, especially where I'm at in my own personal process right now. And I have to say that, well, first of all, like I was an just no hesitation yes to coming on, which I guess isn't really saying much to people who like kind of always say yes to podcasts, but I am so picky. But I was like, oh my God, a chance to talk with Jonathan one on one. Hell yeah. You have just been like such a pleasure to work with and to get to
Mm,
know and to experience. And yeah, it's like you are so, I don't know, like brilliant and luminous yourself. And so to be seen by you this way is really such a gift and a blessing. And I'm so grateful. And it's something I think about quite often that our paths crossed. And I'm excited to see like what story that continues to tell in the future.
mhm, mhm. Thank you for that. I am very grateful for all the ways that you've helped helped me walk my path when I was birthing Eyes on the Edge, because I really feel like your um, guidance and your space holding was extremely impactful in terms of me
Mm,
being able to birth that particular container. And we're going to be talking about world building today, inevitably, because that is at the heart of your work. So I feel like, yeah, I should say that you really helped me build that particular world. And
mm,
um, a consistent feedback I got from participants was how cohesive it was as like an experience, and how people were getting so much out of it that was energetic, and this is something that you and I have talked about with regards to like me and how I put out my work, that a lot of it is maybe not even through words, or through like concepts, but really through guiding people through experiences that help them find their own truth and their own medicine. And in that sense, I feel deep resonance and kinship with your work, because I feel like you also provide this really sturdy structure for people to kind of come into. But then what they discover within that is really a reflection of their own being, their own essence, you know?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same thing with that kinship between our work and this approach of kind of like energetics first,
Hmm.
second and last. Like just this like it's really interesting how, in our little sphere of the world in which we have a lot of overlap, there is this acknowledgement of like how everything is energy and like energetics and like integrity, which when we're talking about integrity, we're really talking about like energy flowing where it needs to flow and how it should flow.
Yeah.
And yet there's still, it's still so hard to really, really lean into that. And,
Hmm.
kind of like to put it in like the memeified version or language of it to like operate on vibes only, like that kind of thing. And it's something that I like constantly in deeper practice with of like how to um focus less and less on anything that's about proving,
Hmm.
and I think that that's not true for everyone, but I think for some people, dare I say dreamers and world builders,
Hmm.
there is this like structure emerges organically, from the dream, from the clarity, from the conviction.
Yeah.
It's a secondary, like just naturally occurring iteration, right?
Hmm.
And that's understanding how natural law works.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, it's hard to not get caught up in that. We live in such a structure heavy, like conditioning
Yeah.
vortex. And to
Hmm.
bring it back to the essence and to bring people back to essence, and like I like using I like you said sturdy structure. And it's like, yeah, I do like using that to make people feel like they're held. And also because I'm a nerd, so I love it. I'm like, oh wow, look how this puzzle piece fits in this puzzle piece, like that's how I kind of set up structure.
Yeah.
But it lets people feel held in a way that allows them, like you said, to then just like experience themselves, see
Hmm.
themselves, let go of that
Hmm.
and get into something deeper. So there's a
Hmm.
little bit of an element of the trickster in my work and my approach that you're kind of touching on that I appreciate, and that I'm embracing more and more because
Hmm.
I am like, yeah, let me use this language or this structure to kind of like seduce you in and then like not pull the carpet out from under your feet, but make you realize you're flying, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Like you don't actually need this.
Yeah, yeah. This is reminding me, Ari, of how a lot of our work has been actually, in terms of you and I working together, have been focused on the moon. And I
Mm,
do think there is this paradox, of um, how much structure is needed or how much holding is needed, reassurance is needed in order for us to feel safe emotionally
right.
so that we can kind of tap more into this rather like werewolf like quality, like kind of this lunatic that's kind of wanting to come through, and that is also part of our genius, right? And so
Exactly.
I feel like this is a good place to start because if I remember correctly, when I first kind of became aware of your work, you were doing what you were calling emotional support. And the
Mm-hmm.
ocean there is included somewhere in um how you spell that word. But it kind of felt to me like you were really in that lunar realm, and then for whatever reason, I think you rebirth yourself into more of the Saturn in Aquarius person. It's at
Mm.
least my perception of it. I'm curious to hear maybe more about wherever you want to start, how you got into world building, and how maybe even providing emotional support for sensitives, intuitives, dreamers, mystics led you to centering world building in your work.
Hmm. Yeah, what a great question. Bringing in my lore. It's so cringe to like remember that I was known in my past iterations, I'm like, oh, you saw that? What? Oh, I thought that was like 30 years ago, but it was not. It's not that long ago. Yeah, wow. It does feel like that's just a whole other life. Um, yeah, so at that time I was doing for many years, I was doing emotional support for apocalypse.
Mm.
So my work was really oriented around providing um like safe and transformative spaces and experiences for people to kind of process the uncoverings of, society, reality, the world, whatever you want to call it, and find their power in that. So I that orientation was really coming from, it's always so interesting looking back and being like seeing the ways that some things you were doing were a distortion, but
Mm.
also seeing how they were like true to where you were at that time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so at that time I was really in. uh, a story of my own pain and my own um, rage and grief in relationship to the world. And um, so that's kind of where I localized my focus. I was very like, probably with around the time you found me, I was already on my way out of it, but
Mm.
I was in a period of my life where I was very consumed by puritanical political ideology. So my work was an outcome of focusing on um, kind of like centralizing the problem.
Mm.
So even my tagline, like emotional support for apocalypse, it's like apocalypse is the issue, right? Or like the thing that's happening, this negative thing that's happening, and this transformative thing that's happening, and then like what's needed is emotional support. So I was Saltwater Stars for many years, and that was a name that I kind of like operated under, and offering emotional support for apocalypse was like it wasn't my tagline for that long. I'd say maybe 2 to 3 years. So,
Mm.
because I was always I was always third lining. It's always like changing, like what I was calling myself or what I was doing. So it's kind of funny because I'm like, I even now it's hard for me to pinpoint where, like how and where exactly changed because it was just this like gradual kind of shedding process of like puritanical political ideology and like being so focused on like just always centralizing the problem and the issue and like and again, not that it was all complete distortion, right? A lot
Mm.
of what I was saying, what I was doing, like is what I'm saying and doing now. All A lot of the process was just getting clearer and more precise,
Mhm.
and deeper. And so it was in 2022, early 2022, that I mentored with P the Fairy, did
Mm.
like a one-on-one for a month. And that experience really gave me, I'd already like become like a timeline jumping tour guide and been working with their stuff for some time. And like that was a byproduct of the shift I was making within myself up until that point of like away from this kind of very accessitarian way of being, actually, that
Mm.
was like very like, okay, commitment and discipline and like
Mhm.
work and like da 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 da, into this more psychedelic, like consciousness expanding expression that's like a truer iteration of who I am. So working with them really gave me permission to shift. And like at that time I was like, why am I not like working with the that people I want to work with? Like something's always kind of like, it's kind of like this. I don't feel energized by my one-on-ones as much as I want to, like, because there's this kind of like slimy, gunky energy. And
Mm.
they were like, well, they didn't probably say this bluntly, but they were like, well, you're using the word apocalypse.
Mm.
So people who are drowning and who are suffering and who feel like they need a savior and need help are going to respond to that word. They're like, you know what you mean by it, but not
Mm.
everyone does. And it's just this
Yeah.
like obvious moment of like, oh my God, Doug. It's like I knew that I wasn't, and I would talk about this, like apocalypse. I wasn't like, this is bad. I was like, this is the uncovering, this is the change, this is transformation. God has changed. Like
Yeah.
very from a like, you know, um, a framework of apocalypse that I learned and was affirmed in by Adrienne Mary Brown's work with emergent strategy and like
Mhm.
how they approach apocalypse. And so, yeah, it was just a moment of being like, oh, I'm using a language that like I know what I mean by it. Um, but I'm also not interested in the work of constantly explaining what I mean by it,
Mm.
because it's like I
Mhm.
don't even want to talk about the problem all the time.
Yeah.
So that experience, and a lot of other knots that were all tangled up in that really allowed me to pivot. And like it was
Mm.
like a pivot
Mhm.
into using a language of dreaming and world building.
Yeah.
And those just kind of came. Like there wasn't any mental process of it. It's just like one day I saw the word world building and I was like, that's it. And then, yeah, dreaming must have happened like a similar way because I don't remember. And I was like, okay, those are my words. And then
Mm.
around this time last year, I think it might have been March or late February, I pivoted into the Dream Mami.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, this like what I'm really interested in doing is exactly what you were articulating, which is why it's so beautiful to hear, is just like helping supporting these like powerful beings, these powerful mystics in birthing worlds and birthing realities on whatever scale
Mhm.
they desire to do so.
Mhm.
And that like energetic acupuncturist part is very like for me it's all about love. Like I care more about your freedom, like your absolute freedom than anything else. Like more than dogma, more than ideology, more than anything I'm saying, like
Mm.
I care more about your freedom than anything else. And so just kind of bringing in this, like Mami, Mami is my kind of like New Yorican, like Boricua, this like hot young auntie kind of energy.
Yeah.
But it's also like the Empress and the High
Mhm.
Priestess, this other kind
Mhm.
of like mothering energy
Yeah.
that's about midwifing and nurturing and nourishing. And
Mhm.
so emotional support for apocalypse in many ways is just like it's just another way of saying, support for
Mm.
dreamers and world builders because it's about nourishing you in the now moment to navigate and contend and shape change
Mm.
and your reality, which reality change, God's all the same thing.
Yeah.
Um And so, yeah, that pivot for me, it's crazy that it feels so long ago because like the physical iterations of it were so recent. Like last year I became the Dream Mommy, and the year before that I like changed my tagline. But the emotional and spiritual transformations that I've undergone to
Mm.
become who I am now and like
Mhm.
arrive here have been happening my whole life.
Yeah.
It really is like such a deep part of my lore, which is what I think is like the best version of business is like an expression of your lore.
Yeah, exactly. Um, wow, there's so much I want to pick at there, but I think for some reason, what I'm really guided to ask you about is to talk a little bit about nourishment, because this idea of how to nourish the dream that is growing within us um, feels just really important to me at this moment. And I think a lot of us can see, like, it doesn't take a lot nowadays for, especially those listening to this conversation, to even just see how much of the old world order is like breaking down, right? Like the structures that we have been taught to rely upon have either not ever been a thing to hold on to or is now really crumbling. And so this piece around nourishment is, I think, something that tends to get a little bit lost in the conversation, right? And I think I'm aware that the way that we perceive or orient towards nourishment has been co-opted a lot within the overculture, and so yeah, I want to hear you talk more about nourishment. And I'm going to, before I kind of pass off the mic to you, I want to share a moment within my mentorship with you that was really profound to me, which was you had brought in this concept of giving the self reassurance in that point of, in that process of transformation. And this is something I'm still chewing on right now, and I'm still in such deep praxis with, because when you said that, I realized that wasn't something I ever received from um, my birth parents, but also from authority figures. And especially in pivotal moments of my life where I was maybe pivoting, you and I talk a lot about my trajectory from follower to leader. A lot of the times when I'm kind of pivoting from a follower to a leader, I didn't get this reminder to reassure myself that I'm on the right path. And this seemingly simple advice you gave me has been so important for me in the past few months. And it's been a practice of like, what reassurance do I need? Because I'm a Pisces sun. It's easy for me to kind of see the bigger picture and see from a spirit level energetically, like, yes, I'm moving towards the right direction. But to feel safe within my body is another story altogether. And I think, yeah, what's coming up for you from everything that I'm sharing? Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly what you're describing is this kind of like gap that dreamers fall into, like world builders fall into specifically,
Hmm.
because we're operating in a field, not just energetically, but in physical reality that doesn't come with any presets,
Mm.
right? And so without presets, without defaults, without kind of, established pillars, there is this, much like in the psychedelic experience, this kind of like just wobbliness that can come, or like being born, being a
Mm.
newborn baby.
Mhm.
And nourishment as reassurance. I love that you made that connection because that is a big part of what I mean. Like, and you know this from having worked with me. Like, I'm not. Um, my version of like reassurance or nourishment isn't, I think, what a lot of people might imagine when they tap into that energy.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, it it's more about faith and conviction,
Mm.
and this is something that I'm like leaning into more and more deeply myself. Is like, what does offer our bodies this reassurance? Because, like you said, on this like spiritual level, on this bigger picture level, it can be easier in a sense to offer oneself existential reassurance if you like have, created your own existential concepts of like, I'm walking my path, and things are unfolding as they're meant to be. But on this like physical human level,
Mm.
there's so much um separation and severance that we're contending with. And there can be so much isolation. There doesn't have to be, but there often is so much isolation that comes with being someone who has decided to unplug and do things a different way. Because what you kind of do is unplug from established forms and sources of reassurance of like, yes, you got your degree and you're doing a good job. No, now you have this high paying job. Good job. Oh, now you have 2 kids. Good job. Oh, now you bought a house. Good job. Well, I guess you should have 4 kids. I don't know. But like all these like typical ways that we used to get reassurance,
Yeah.
for our physical form,
Hmm.
right? Like for the physical life. And note that distinction is different than like the spiritual life, right?
Hmm.
Like you're saying, like that kind of has its own rules of reassurance that are limitless and never ending and eternal and always there. And
Yeah.
the physical form, we're like, oh, here's the ways that we, give our physical bodies reassurance that we're like doing well. We want to know we're doing well because
Hmm.
this incarnation is incredibly excruciating in the beautiful and the difficult ways. And we just want to know that we're doing a good job. And so that's what I mean by nourishing the dream reality. It's like dreamers need so much support in that. And we're not conditioned to, like you said, think in terms of giving ourselves that or receiving that. And people around us may not think to offer it either if they're not operating the same paradigm.
Mm. Hmm.
And so, yeah, there's just like a reality can't come into being without nourishment
Mm.
and nurturance,
Yeah.
aka attention, or
Hmm.
positive obsession or like actions or like, how whatever you want to physically do or energetically do to water it. And
Mm.
it's the same way that a baby cannot come into its full form as an adult, as a person on earth without being nurtured and nourished. And how many of us are living with the consequences of the ways that we weren't nurtured and nourished.
Yeah.
And so there's these parts of us that are still a baby or still
Mm-hmm.
5 or still 8 or still 12 because we just needed a little bit more water.
Mm-hmm.
And so the emotional experience of being incarnated is complex, but um I think that healing can be simple.
Mm-hmm.
Finding that root of where there's been that lack of nourishment and nourishing, and bringing some loving awareness and loving attention there, and unconditional acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is what I mean by nourishing the dreamer, nourishing the dream, because it's like forgetting to water a plant. And it's in a way, it's a discipline.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like being a parent, like you have to take care of that child. It's like the same thing. And like you have to commit, you be devoted to nourishing that dream reality, to nourishing your dream self, to nourishing yourself as someone who dreams. Because, it's kind of like part of taking responsibility as a grown human being is understanding that there are some things that will not be provided unto you. You must provide them for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as dreamers, we can't wait for reality or others or the world or paradigms to validate and affirm the incredibly crucial work that we're doing in dreaming
Mm-hmm.
up other realities and future worlds.
Yeah.
We can't wait for that. And so we must take it upon ourselves to do
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Um, I want to bring in this question of what world building means to you, because I feel like we're kind of like inside the woods now already, but um, I don't want to assume that everybody has the same definition of what world building means. So, what is world building in your experience, opinion, perception?
I do like to keep my definition and my kind of like idea of world building intentionally a little ambiguous and a little
Mm,
malleable.
mhm,
Um, I I do like there is this kind of like you named from the beginning, the Saturn and Aquarius aspect to it. Also like the Getty, which is a fifth star that my Saturn is conjunct and is considered a world building star,
mm,
which was another part of like my permission of like pivoting that direction. Um, so there is this kind of like, okay, where we're moving the dream from the dream realm, um, of imagination and sensation, or as I like to call it, night sect, the nocturnal, into the physical or incarnated realm of structure, synthesis, who you're being, ideology, worldview. These are more things that take place in a concrete way that really like impact the concrete realm, or dissect the diurnal.
mm,
And so that world building is a lifestyle. But it really is. That's really how I look at it. Like it's a way of thinking that everything I'm doing, everything, all my choices are building a world, they're
mm,
building a reality.
mhm,
So another way to think about world building is as the lived experience,
mhm, mhm,
right? Which the distinction, like that line, just like the line between day and night is very thin, the line between the dream realm and world building is also thin, you know. Um, but there is still a line there,
mhm,
of the difference between something that is kind of happening in the other and in your imaginal realm or your sensational realm, which I still see as 100% real.
mm, mm,
And what's
mhm.
happening in your physical realm, your lived experience, that's also 100% real.
Yeah.
But there is a process, and this is a process of birth. It's a process of like go coming from non-human to human. You know, your soul is as real as your physical body, but they're operating in different dimensions. So there's a birthing process to come from the immaterial to the material. And
Mm-hmm.
that process is what I mean by world building.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, there we can get linear with it, and I kind of played with that a bit in world building school cohort one, where I was like, and let's look at science fiction, let's look at different genres. Like, what is this world? What does it look like? What is it? You know, kind of getting in this kind of concrete realm, and that's fun to play with. But I think that we're still working on reconnecting and cultivating our playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so if things get too linear, it can be easy to like, that becomes another dogma,
Yes.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I like to like not just leave a lot of spaciousness with the world building. And it's like, what do you think it means? You know, what do you
Mm.
want it to be? What do you want it to, what do you want concretization to feel like and be like for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this kind of duality of like, here's very clearly what I mean by it, but also I mean nothing by it. You can decide.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is interesting because I feel like this is such a beautiful there's such a beautiful way in which you are placing us in orientation and not dogma or a set of principles. And you wrote recently in one of your newsletters, what if the more free, loving, and true we are to ourselves, the more we open up a world of connection? What if it's possible to create new conditions of belonging, not only with other world builders, but with everyone? What if belonging is a condition of being alive on the planet, not belonging to a specific ideology, context, or identity? This to me is very connected to also what you said about world building as predicated on the primacy of direct experience. So, for folks listening, this may just sound like a bunch of words. So, I want to break that down because I remember, Ari, when I was in world building school 1.0, this was something I personally struggled with a little bit because I think for me at that time, this idea of the primacy of our direct experience kind of feels like, you know, when you bring that into the capitalist individualist structure, it feels like selfishness. But that's not what you mean, right? I'm curious to hear, or is it?
I love that bid for reassurance. That's not what you mean, right? In that context, right? Like
Yes.
in that context of the capitalistic, like hyper individualistic
Mhm.
structure, like how
Mhm.
selfishness is viewed in that. Yes, it's what I mean.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? Like according to that paradigm, you as a dreamer, as a world builder, are going to appear selfish. Oh, you don't want to
Mhm.
participate in the game? Oh, everyone else
Mhm.
is doing it this way. Why do you think you're different? What makes you
Mhm.
special? Who do you
Mhm.
think you are?
Mhm.
Oh, why are you only focused on like, you know, what you want to create? Like there is there in that context, yes, I do mean being selfish,
Mhm.
right? Or like
Mhm.
self-centered,
Mhm.
centered in yourself. And that's what primacy of direct experience is,
Yeah.
because other people's experiences are out of your purview. They're none of your
Mhm.
business and they're outside of your control.
Mhm.
You don't know
Mhm.
what's going on really,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? But I don't think you were complete with your thoughts. So
No, I just want you to talk more about this idea of centering our direct experience because I think this is something that we don't get a lot of context around or there's not sufficient. Let me put it this way. I don't think there's sufficient infrastructure and embodied examples to allow this particular ontology to flourish in the ways that are nourishing in our current world. And I feel
absolutely.
that your work provides such a beautiful antidote for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think in one way Absolutely. That's so true. And in another way, it's not true at all, which is like every artist, every musician, actor,
Mm.
producer, director, these are all people who are like, this field work makes no sense. It is not guaranteed to be lucrative, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why this person's coming, but like Brad Pitt is not like, I'm definitely going to be famous, you know? Like,
Mm.
that's not the like orientation of most actors and creatives and musicians. You know, they
Mhm.
weren't like, all right, going to studio today, I'm gonna like, you know, become Mick Jagger. Like that's not how that always works. Some people have that kind of story, you know, where they're like, yep, I always knew, yeah, that's what I'm doing. But most of the times people are like, I have no idea how this happened. I didn't plan for it to happen. You know, Billie Eilish is a great example
Mhm.
of that. And so it's like we think that we don't have examples because we don't have state sanctioned examples.
Mm.
But when
Mhm.
we look at culturally sanctioned examples, we actually have quite an abundance. They just happen to be really like siloed to this one area of like the
Mhm.
entertainment industry that's again culturally sanctioned,
Yeah.
you know. But I don't think something being culturally sanctioned means it must automatically be dismissed as not a
Mhm.
worthy example.
Mhm.
You know, I think the fact that these creators, musicians, artists, you know, whoever, Beyonce, Rihanna, like people who are building worlds from their creativity and from being convicted and committed to what they want to do, those are valid examples. They
Mm.
may not be like perfectly matched up with the paradigm that, you know, you or I might want to exist in, but then again, who are we to say that they're not? We don't know what
Mm.
their intentions or what goes on in their head,
Mhm.
you know? And
Mhm.
so this has turned to like a pro celebrity rant. But you know, my point is it's like we could take a darker route and look at government and society,
Mm.
TM, and like all these things are also great examples of people who were convicted and committed to their dream reality. And we're like, we're going to build a world around this. Every single
Mm.
construct that we now exist in came out of the imagination of someone else who refused to budge on their commitment and their conviction to that world. So
Right.
it's like we are actually immersed in the reality of all realities being real, of everyone being a dreamer and a world builder. It's just
Mm.
we will only see the examples of those who have allowed themselves to be most centered in the primacy of their own experience.
Mm.
And, you know, obviously in some cases to the detriment of everyone else, right?
Mhm.
But not in all cases. You know, like I
Mhm.
saw Beyonce's Renaissance film.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, one of the beautiful things about Beyonce's work is that she really loves her people, you know, kind of
Mm.
thinks of that in that way. I don't think she's ever said her people, you know, but like she
Mhm.
like loves her fans is how she would say it, right? And she's like, this is all for them. I want them to have a beautiful experience. And like this, that love that is put into the artistry, but it's also for her. So
Mm.
it's this thing of like, and you've probably heard me say this so many times, but it's like the brightest contribution you can make to the world is the one that like fills you up
Yeah.
too. You
Yeah.
know, that's coming from that overflow place. So it doesn't require a large amount of what might be perceived as selfishness,
Mm.
and that's because we're so conditioned with this ideology of subservience that's
Mm.
like then been overlaid with this like virtuousness
Mhm.
to it.
Mhm.
Suffering is a virtue, poverty is
Mhm.
a virtue,
Yeah.
martyrdom is a virtue, being submissive is a virtue, thinking only of others is a virtue. I mean, honestly, all we need to do to pop that bubble is ask the question, has any of this worked?
Mm. Mhm.
Are we anywhere near where the fuck we want to be?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And in many ways, we're not. And so I'm like, in my mind, you know, and you know this about me, like a lot of it comes down to very just deep Saturn and Aquarius pragmatism. Where I'm
Mhm.
like, what's working, what's not working? I'm like, this stuff is not working.
Yeah.
Of being so afraid of being selfish or looking selfish that you don't answer the fucking call
Mhm.
that you're receiving from your
Mhm.
creativity, from your life force, from this one precious thing that you've been given that could end any day. You are arrogant to think that you know
Mm.
how long you're here for or what could possibly happen. But you're so afraid of like looking like bad, and this
Yeah.
is why dogma is at the root of so many of our problems. And then we think that new dogmas are going to be the solution. Now the dogma of puritanical political ideology, or the dogma of martyrdom, or being virtuous or being good. Like the dogma of being good is the antidote to the dogma of being bad. And it's like, no, the dogma of being good is just adding to the dogma of being bad, because dogma is dogma.
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Ari Felix, we can all go home after that Sunday sermon. I love it. Um, Something that I kept thinking about while you were speaking was something you wrote about an facilitating an inner enthusiasm. And this feels to me like both of us are generators. I'm a generator, you're a manifesting generator. And I feel like this is kind of like generator tagline here. But you wrote recently, I am dedicated to facilitating an inner enthusiasm for world building within every dreamer. This enthusiasm, when self generated, eliminates the need for outsourcing inner authority, operating within colonial contexts, illusions of separation, and pass fail paradigms to motivate world building, and allows motivation to arise from within. This method midwives your innate capacity for joyful lifelong dreaming and world building. This is so exciting to me because I am it makes me think about the idea of like interrupting, right? And the idea of interrupting the colonial narrative having to do with actually liberating our life force, liberating like that response which naturally arises within us that our colonial paradigm and education and structure has kind of wanted us to suppress or wanted us to harness in a particular way, right? But this inner enthusiasm you're talking about is kind of like an out of controlness that actually shifts us from one timeline to the next. Like you also work with timeline jumping, and this has been my experience actually, that it's more about connecting with that raw life force and trusting that that actually brings us into a different plot line, timeline altogether. Um, what's been your experience with liberating this life force? And what have you seen in your work when one's own access to life force is opened up?
Mm. Oh man, that's like I think that question is really at the crux for me personally. Like that, like you said, I'm sure true for many sacredly defined beings, just like getting back into right relationship with the fact that we do have that running all the time in some way, that energy, in a certain way. But yeah, this liberating the life force and um the consequences and impacts of that is something that just continuously humbles me. Like,
Mm,
and how much I find myself running from that, and getting in my mind,
mm,
or um because what's interesting for me, and maybe, to keep speaking human design a little bit, this is my emotional definition speaking, but I think it's also a human experience. It's like, to get into that space of liberating the life force, I have to like feel my feelings.
mm, mm-hmm,
It's like I can't really like skip past it, like kind of like loophole it, and I've tried. But it's like accessing that sacral life force, that erotic energy that is life, like it is life. Like I just want to keep saying that, like it is life.
yeah,
If you don't have that, you're dead,
mm, mm-hmm,
whether you're in the ground or not.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I think that that's one of the places of passion for me when it comes to this, because like something I'm always uncovering in myself is places where I am living a death life.
Mm,
Because the avoidance of feeling a certain feeling or pain or the attachment to a certain story is solidified so much that that part of me is in kind of dormancy,
mm,
you know? And so I'm
mhm,
not even talking about death as bad here, but in a broader context of like we are incarnated and we are alive. And so I kind of see it as our responsibility, our ability to respond to cultivating that aliveness.
mm,
Again, back to watering the plant or taking care of a child, these are things that are just kind of like part of this dimension, you
mm,
know?
mhm,
And so getting into deeper and deeper relationship with that erotic force as the source of creation is, I mean, I think what many people are calling the return of the goddess, or the
mm,
resuscitation of the like mother creator, like these kinds of things that's like bringing that erotic life force, not as just like, oh, and there's this kind of life force and then there's this kind of life force, but as
mm.
like, no, that is the source, right?
Yeah.
The primordial is the source
Mhm,
of it, gendered or genderless. And so for me, it's like finding the ways where I'm leaking my life force by doing things I don't want to do, all the typical stuff you hear, saying no when I mean yes, saying yes when I mean no, like da 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 da.
mhm,
Um, that's so crucial to like accessing that inner enthusiasm, which, like I said, is the dreamer, you
mm,
know, and I it's like I've always been a dreamer, but I haven't always been willing to be a world builder.
mm,
You
mhm,
know,
mhm,
I've always been a world builder, but I haven't always been willing to really be like, okay, I can take radical responsibility for my life force and make
mm,
the decisions I need to make and want to make to have the experience of being incarnated that I want to have.
mm,
you know and
mhm,
I can guarantee you I won't always be willing, and so I think the process of liberating that life force is a process of like choosing over and again to um expand that willingness, increase that willingness, find that willingness, and that for me is very related to the emotional process of like, okay, what emotional experience am I having, or not having
mhm,
that is keeping my life force suppressed, keeping that
mm,
pulse of primordial creation suppressed,
mhm,
which is then decreasing my inner enthusiasm for life, which
mm,
is then inhibiting my ability to make decisions for like the world that I want to live in personally or
mm,
collectively,
mhm, mhm.
and so I think our emotional experience as humans is this very like it's kind of like this interesting in between space between like spirit and incarnation, where it's like to really bring the immaterial to the material does require like going through this emotional content, you know
Mm, mhm,
and so that that's my everyday practice.
mhm,
Like as you also know, like I'm not much of a like, and then I do this, and then I do that, and then I do this. People are like, "Do you have a practice?" I'm like, Not really. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I can help you find one for you out of your toolkit, or like maybe a ritual will come to me, but I'm not. I hope no one imagines me sitting around all day doing fucking practices.
mhm,
Like that's not
mhm,
what our life is. But what I am sitting around all day doing is, I mean, like, how can I liberate more and more of this life force?
mhm,
Like, how am I
mhm.
feeling? Like, and it is a very self-absorbed way of being,
Yeah, yeah.
in terms of like, again, have to be centered in myself and constantly finding that center. But I also know that what comes with enough practice and building muscle around that core strength of being centered is that eventually you don't have to think about it as much. You don't have
Mhm,
to be, asking, you don't have to, it's just your core strength and you're there, it's good. you can go about your life. So I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to a place. My dream reality right now is a place where I can trust that core of liberated aliveness,
Mm,
and don't find it slip away from me as easily as
mhm.
it still sometimes does. Though again, that's the game of incarnation. So maybe that dream reality is a fucking delusion, but I'm willing to find out.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because the word that really stuck out at me um, when you were speaking was this idea of willingness, because I do feel like that willingness is like more than half the battle here, so to speak. You know, that willingness. Because it's so much easier to collapse. It's so much easier to avoid. It's so much easier
Yes.
to
Yes.
like
Yes.
overexert, even. Like sometimes we think
Yes.
willingness looks like,
Yes.
let me make my
Yes.
aura really big and like become this like monster, that just like tackles my to do list. But like, that's not it, right? Like, that's not it. It's really
No, no, no.
about meeting whatever is coming up with a level of attunement and
Yes.
a willingness to like see eye to eye with it, and that can
Yeah.
sometimes, I think, for me as a non-emotional being, Ari, what's so hard about it is that I don't always have the patience to do that because I just want to like
Mm.
get it done,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah.
want to just like follow this impulse. But sometimes, like, even for me, what I'm realizing is it feels very musical, right? It's like I don't always realize that like I'm in a much slower piece than what I thought, right? Or like I need
Mm.
to approach it with more gentleness, or I need to approach it with maybe a different instrument altogether, And how do I meet that moment with attunement? Sometimes even just getting there takes a while, and it takes
Mm-hmm.
some like kind of breaking down of the conditioning layer that are around it.
Right, right, exactly. And that's where the emotional realm comes in, because it's like um the emotions are these like little entities that get attached to these little, conditioning blocks, right? And so moving through them is how you dissolve the block of
Mm,
conditioning, that's keeping you from that attunement and that dance, that music. Exactly, exactly. It's like this intimacy
mm,
with life and availability to life, which is kind of, that was the focus of what I talked about in the Great Defrosting with Saturn and Pisces, really kind of bringing us out
mm,
of this like heavy Saturnian realm into a different kind of Saturnian realm that's like the discipline of softness and the discipline of
mm,
being available, and how much like, yeah, surrender, that's the only like word I really know that describes what it feels like of how much surrender it requires.
mm.
And I think willingness and surrender are synonyms in this context.
Totally.
And I think while it's like can be one of the most stretchy kind of things, it's also a little bit goes a long way.
Mm,
And I kind of like you're saying with the overextension, like we think we have to have 100% willingness, you know, no, you just need a little bit, you know,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
100% availability. Like, no, you just need a little bit
Mhm,
to life,
mhm,
to that primordial pulse, because that's the thing, is that it's already there. This part of the illusion that comes with some of the paradigms we're currently wrestling with on this timeline is that it's not there,
mm,
you
mhm,
know, kind of like the idea that like God can leave you.
mm. Yes.
It's
Right.
like that primordial pulse doesn't go anywhere. That creative life force, that inner enthusiasm doesn't actually go anywhere. It can't,
Mm,
but we just imagine that it has. And then we're like, and now it's gone the long
mm,
Candyland journey of
mhm,
returning to it, and it's like, because, yeah, sure, it can be that, and that's also part of the game,
mm,
but it's
mhm.
like, you can also just like skip that, just, just like
Yeah.
reconnect to it directly.
Mhm,
Um, yeah, it's like it's so it's so maddening and also so hilarious how like everything we're talking about just comes down to the fact that we have these these dogmas, these ideas, that have solidified into these not only paradigmatic structures, but like cellular structures over
Hmm.
generations of oppression that now we have to kind of like remember it's a game
Hmm.
and learn how to play it. And that's why I love using the planets, because I'm like, the planetary ancestors are such good teachers of how to play the game and how to participate in the game of incarnation and describe the game, what's
Hmm.
happening now, what happened then, what's gonna happen, like, and they're so willing to play along with us too, so I feel like learning to play the planetary game is such a hack to learning to play the game of incarnation.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Um, I'm wanting to hear you talk more about that. Um, about the connection between deepening our relationship with the planetary ancestors and how that can assist us in world building endeavors. And also, more generally, or in a more expansive way, I'm also just curious to hear what's been on your mind as you're getting ready for World Building School 2.0. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm so excited about this about world
Me
building
too.
school. I mean, I was excited about it last time, especially because it was the first, and I was like, "What's happening?" Like a lot of my ideas, like kind of me in that way, where I'm like, like I get to discover them too.
Mm.
And so this, the particular, the planetary ancestors are like, I don't know, like sharing with me these sharing with us these sequences and frameworks for understanding and navigating reality. Um, and I don't mean in a way that's like different from like astrology. I think that is astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, okay, I'll start at the beginning. So the planets are such a fun and easy entryway into unplugging from dominant reality and conditioning and dogmas, because they're astrology is based on the premise that these balls of gas and rock that none of us will ever touch in our lives, we can't even fathom the magnitude of them, have been circling around the planet, and giving us advice basically.
Mm-hmm.
and communicating with us, and we've been translating these communications for millennia. Now we have this whole system, and it's very serious, and it's so legit, and it's very technical and super, super real and intellectual, but it's based on this completely psychedelic, ridiculous premise that we're
Mm-hmm.
talking to these other planets, and that there's
Mm-hmm.
a system that describes reality. Not
Yeah.
only describes the past, the present, but also the future on a textural level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think is such a sneaky way to just interrupt all assumptions about what's real and isn't real, right?
Yeah.
What reality is or isn't. That's why I think it's so funny to me when like astrologers are very serious and very like technical, and like, astrology and Judaism have a lot in common, not just historically, but like I think in the approach, and as a Jew, I'm always like, yeah, astrologers and like Jews are Saturn and Aquarius with this like, just paradigm and structure and like these solidified ideas and stuff. But when you really think about it, it's so silly. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's so silly to like get on a podcast and be like, yeah, so this is the da 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 da, and here's how it ties to world events, and like da 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 da, and this is, completely legitimate, and like we don't know how it works, but it does, and you know, this is this is like as real as science, and
Yeah.
I'm like, If we could really acknowledge the absurdity of what we're implying by the fact that the system of astrology even exists at all,
Mm,
it's literally like being unplugged from the matrix. You
mhm,
know, it would be that kind of, if people really like sunk into that experience and like the reality of what we're saying, you know,
mhm.
when you're like, oh, my moon's in Pisces and this is describes all of this experiences I've had and this way I feel. And it's like, how? Why? You know, like
Exactly.
it's like, oh, I don't know. And it's like, yeah, because it's a fucking mystery. Because like we don't know what we're doing here. And it's
Hmm.
all open, you know, it's an open-ended game, it's an open world game.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the idea or my approach rather with astrology when it comes with like to world building and other people and like inviting other people into world building through astrology or vice versa, because it's an easy way, especially now that astrology is becoming a more well-known language,
Mm,
for people to access like, oh yeah, this is mysterious and reality is psychedelic, and then that opens us up into like, well then I don't have to get that job and I don't have to buy a house. I don't, you know, kind of like the crumbling of the structures and systems are already doing that.
mhm,
But I don't think we only need terrifying ways to realize how absurd reality is. We can have fun ways too. So I think astrology is a fun way. So once you realize that reality is absurd, then you realize you can do anything.
mm,
It's all
mhm,
open.
mhm,
It's all made up,
mhm,
you know. And
mhm,
I'm not in any way saying that like we just made up that moon in Pisces means this. I think that is
mm,
like empirical Gnostic data, you
mhm,
know. Like I'm
mhm.
not like I'm just pretending to believe in astrology. Like no, I'm like hardcore planetary ancestors as an OG game. Like, you know,
Mhm.
this is for real.
Yeah.
But I think like on a human consciousness level, it kind of can, like you said, interrupts, like business as usual interrupts your usual programming when you kind of invite in this planetary consciousness and this
Mm,
multi-planetary consciousness.
mhm,
So using that entryway to get into world building, I'm then taking like these ancient schemas, like sect is my main one that I love to play with, especially in world building school specifically. And sect is just this distinction between day and night. Very simple. So
mhm,
simple. It's like the original mirror
mhm,
of reality. Day,
mhm,
night, internal, external, as above, so below, as within, so without, like all these like mystical principles that have been with us since the beginning of time are really depicted through sect. You
yeah.
know, the sun, the moon, and like our the fundamental, the two pillars of our reality here on Earth, as depicted through the luminaries. And so um, I've kind of like, I don't know, they just dropped this shit into my head. So it's not even like, oh, and then I made this thing, you know, this framework. It's like it just appears to me. And so right now I'm using what we're gonna do in world building school. So world building school year one was really just kind of like breaking down sect and each planet, just kind of getting in touch with each planet. But what they're doing with us now is going a little further and looking into the sequences of each sect, so Moon, Venus,
Mm,
Mars, and
mhm,
like how do you like use that as a world building technology? So I'm taking
mm,
these ancient astrological schemas and being like, how do we implement this into like creating reality?
mhm,
How do we move beyond just describing reality, right? Which
mm,
is kind of like the way that reality has or astrology has been legitimized is by keeping it in
mm.
that section of like it just describes it,
Right.
the past, present, future, but you know,
Right.
and then like astro magic opens that up a little bit more where it's like, oh, you can also like bring it down into items and you know materia and experience it that way from that moment in time. So I want to like bring it even more beyond. It's like, and these schemas don't just describe how reality works, but how you can work reality,
Mhm,
you know. And so
mhm,
we have that idea a little bit if you're like in the astro magic realm and you understand remediation, where it's like you can work like ritualistically or liturgically with a planet to remediate like energetic things.
mhm,
So this is like kind of like that, but like you don't have to know anything about astro magic. You know, it's not about remediation. It's not about fixing your chart or your life, but it's about looking at the sequences of like ancient astrological schemas as like
mm,
reality creation instructions
mhm,
and guidance.
mhm,
And so sect is like the simplest way in, and it's just kind of like keeps evolving into um more sequences and like um frameworks and templates
Mm-hmm.
for reality creation. And so I love it because it takes reality creation, which is another realm that people have a lot of ideas and thoughts about, but into it kind of, for those who are already speaking the language of astrology at whatever it's done, it roots it.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes this like multi-planetary collaboration of
Mm.
world building,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus just like, oh, reality creation, something happens in my mind or in my energy, or I need to like do this or that, to like, okay, I can think of reality creation in this way. So again, like I said, not because I'm so interested in being linear,
Mm.
I'm not like, and no, this is how you have to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
just because like as we divorce from linear ways of thinking and being, as we divorce from old paradigms, we do need replacements,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're just temporary. Like
Yeah.
if we play with these sequences enough, you don't need them,
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
we kind of notice as people master systems, I've been playing with the planetary ancestors for 15 years. There's a lot of ways that I don't need to think. There's a lot of things that I don't need to think about that are just baked into second nature now. And so
Yeah.
that's my kind of like long vision for how this material works, this world building material works, where it's like it gives you a new way to think. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to just use old paradigm that then you eventually won't even need that way either. But
Mm-hmm.
what's cool is because it's woven into astrology, it's a living system. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, eternal. So it's like it can't ever become irrelevant or expire, you
Yes.
know? So I know it's
Exactly.
like super long nerd rant, but this is
I
very exciting
love
to
it.
me. This is my all I think about all day.
I love it. Yeah, it's also making me think about, something that I have been saying to clients and students over the past few years is how I perceive astrology as a portal, right, to reality. It almost becomes this intermediary step so that we can step outside of the numinousness of our embodied reality. And then we can have this map or the screen upon which we project and we kind of do these simulations in a way. And then when we re enter into that embodied reality, we have a different perspective on it. And so it helps us enter into dimensions of reality that maybe were not super clear to us at first,
Right.
and it helps us see. It's like, this is why mystics, from since like ancient times have always been really into systems, right? Because I think there's something about systems that helps us see the unseen, and in seeing the unseen, and conceptualizing the unseen with our minds, somehow that can shift our heart's posture and our energetics, the way that we work with energy, and that
Hmm.
creates other realities.
It's their consciousness expanding agents,
Yes,
and
psychedelics.
like, yeah, in World Building School 1, I talked about day sect planets, Sun, Jupiter, Saturn as consciousness expanding, and then night sect planets, Moon, Venus, Mars as consciousness contracting. Because
Mm,
expanding and contracting, that is the original pulse of reality. That's
yeah.
the basis of natural law. That's like ground zero, right?
Hmm.
Literally the zero, right? This
Hmm.
infinite just like going. Um, and so but on a broader level, I think, yeah, astrology is a system that is consciousness expanding,
Hmm.
right? Because it's moving out of just this planet to the entire solar system, and then everything you said. It's like it's conceptual, which I think is
Hmm.
what's so cool about the schemas, but it's also so visceral.
Yeah.
Um, and what I love about this work is that it's so obvious once you see it,
Mm.
like what I'm doing with sect. I mean, what I've done with astrology in general is like no one else has ever done. It's never been done before. Like it's
Hmm.
never been done before.
Hmm.
And I say that is important to emphasize, not for my personal glory, but for the fact that like that shows that we're still in processes of creating and
Mm,
understanding reality.
yeah.
We're still discovering, we're still learning,
Right.
you know? And these kinds of like Venn diagrams and merging of systems and overlays of, ideas is still in process of happening,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think ancient astrologers, they were mystics and mystical. It wasn't as divorced from mysticism as it is now. So
Mm-hmm.
that it can get some kind of like intellectual clout.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
mystical thing, it was a magical thing, and they understood that. And so bringing it into what we now call reality creation, or what, um, traditional, um, I don't know, traditional African religions would call natural law, or,
Mm-hmm.
all over the world, we have ways of calling natural law or like
Mm-hmm.
reality creation or world building or this thing of like, how do you do life on Earth?
Yeah.
You know? And so what I love about this work is that what I'm doing has never been done before. And it's so resonant and obvious to those who engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is gonna might be a weird example, but like just think of myself in an abstract way. Like part of the reason why it's not like there isn't this like huge wave of people being like, wow, Ari Felix is doing something that's never been done before. Like it's so crazy, like applying the ancient scheme of sex to reality creation and like, how do we use it? Like the reason why that is not happening in that way is because it's like it's a language that's already speaking. It's just
Mm.
everyone who kind of like takes the time to look at it is just like, oh yeah, like it just makes sense.
Yeah.
It just like
Right.
somatically it just like makes sense. And so there's not just some kind of like, it's not like taking psychedelics necessarily, even though there's that underlying energy, but it's just like you're just like, oh yeah, just like
Mm-hmm.
astrology, right? Because it is
Mm-hmm.
astrology, like in a way I
Mm-hmm.
am teaching astrology. I'm just not teaching you, astrology 101 fundamentals,
Yeah.
but I'm using a language to teach you something else, to teach you
Mm-hmm.
what astrology has been gesturing at all this time, which is that reality is more than meets the eye, and
Mm-hmm.
reality is changeable and malleable and mysterious.
Mm.
And that's again another thing that you state, and people are like, "Oh yeah, so true, bestie." But like when you really, really lean into that and embody that, and it's like, oh, so even all these constructs or ideas I'm trying to fit into, even this and that, that's also made up. It's also
Mm.
malleable. It's
Mm-hmm.
also even the suffering,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
even
Yeah.
the war, even
Mm-hmm.
the loss and the grief,
Mm-hmm.
that also can change,
Mm-hmm.
like when you really, again, the same thing with like if we really sat down and think about what astrology is, beyond an abstract system, we'd be like, oh, it would be, I think if we could really, really feel it, it would be exactly how taking shrooms feels. Because you would just be like dead, you'd be like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm trying to take people. It's like use astrology in a way that gets them to be like, whoa, what the fuck? So then you're free, right? And that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the ritualistic purpose of shrooms too, or like
Yeah.
other medicine plants. It's like, first we got to get you free. We got to get you to
Mm-hmm.
see beyond what you think you can see. And then you can like exist in a whole new realm. You could build a world, you could dream, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera.
Mm. Beautiful. Well, that was just so incredible. All right, thank you. I love that. Um,
Thanks for asking such great questions. I'm excited to answer.
yeah. Um, I'm curious as we wind down to a close, if there's anything else that you kind of want to share here that maybe I haven't explored or I haven't asked you about.
Oh. I think really I would just want to like circle it and root it down like the Venus glyph into love.
Mm,
You know, and this comes back to the faith and conviction thing, which I didn't expound on. And so yeah, I'd love to do that, which is like in order to nurture the dream reality, nourish the dream self, in order to world build, in order to be free, we need to feel like there's a reason why,
Mm,
there's a purpose, there's a meaning. And I think, like we've been saying, a lot of our old ways of accessing a sense of purpose and meaning are changing,
mm,
Um, and so now we're creating new ways as we always have. And my personal investment and the place where I'm constantly wanting to increase my faith and my conviction is in love and liberation.
mm,
Like that, all of this stuff is so cool and it's so fun, it's so crazy. Um, and and I think if in some weird other little timeline I didn't really care about other people that much, I would still be like interested in it. But the reason why I've dedicated my life and the reason why part of the reason why I continue to be able to increase my willingness to build a world that allows me to be sitting here with you today having this conversation and not working a double shift, 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. at Applebee's, is because I care so much. I love you so much. I love you all so much. It's like you sound like I'm like not human, but like I love us so much. That's better.
yeah.
I love us all so much, and I love the dream of our liberation and our freedom and the joy and the beauty and abundance that comes with that.
Mm,
I think sometimes people think that I'm gesturing towards a utopia in my work. They're like some utopia memes and stuff like that. And I'm like, I've never even really used that word. And I don't think in those terms. I'm not like, we're going to bring heaven on earth and we're going to
mm,
be in this idyllic paradise if everyone could just take these shrooms or,
yeah.
go to
Yeah.
worldbuilding school. Like,
Mhm.
that's not what I'm saying. But I do believe in like an increased critical mass of beings, these
Mm,
mystical entities that we are and that we can be on this planet, in this dimension at this time, who can create this field, this like impenetrable, eternal, like unfuckwithable field of love and joy and beauty. Because I mean, man, one of the most humbling and just exquisite experiences that I have had the pleasure of having multiple times in my life is to experience the realization that like that just might be the reason,
mm,
you
mhm,
know? And I
mhm,
don't have the audacity or arrogance to say it is the reason,
mm,
for everyone on the planet and like that why we're all here, da 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 da. But I am like willing to be crazy enough to have faith and conviction to just act as if that is the reason. Because the results and the outcomes and the worlds that generates, I mean, if we want to take a suffering central approach, like that is the antidote then,
mhm.
you
Yeah.
know. But even without suffering being the contextualizer for everything, it's like, why fuck not? What do we want? Some more love, joy, beauty, fun. Like, what's the purpose of being incarnated?
Mhm.
I don't think the purpose is to suffer.
Yeah.
I think that's just a symptom,
Mhm.
just like the purpose of, like, I don't know, giving birth, isn't to suffer. And then you
Yeah.
just like, you're like, okay, farewell,
Right.
child. Like, it's like, no, that this thing has been created.
Mhm.
Good, bad,
Mhm.
neutral, whatever. But so
Yeah.
I think that there's this pulse of creation that is neutral um, on the planet. And I think that we can decide to, with our faith in the possibility of our conviction being realized, that we can create a a dreamier reality of love and beauty for everyone. And liberation, I think, is really just the key, because that's the only thing keeping us from being who we really are, which is these beings of love.
Yeah.
That's the only thing keeping us from it.
Yeah.
Is like, oppression and dogma and all that shit. Um,
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess in a way I'm closing with my vision, like
Mm,
what's at the root of all this work and my insufferable dedication to liberating my life force is really because I could be content just living my own little life and I don't know, receiving these insights and applying them myself, but I'm
mm,
not because
mhm,
I want more for us,
mhm.
and I believe in more for us. Um, yeah.
Thank you. I feel your dedication and devotion and commitment to being the vessel for this work, and it's so inspiring.
Thank you,
I
love.
love it. Um, okay, so I guess my last question is uh, logistics. I'm curious how people can find you, how people can find your work, any deadlines for World Building School 2.0 that you want to share, and yeah, anything else that you feel like sharing logistically in terms of how people can find you and engage with your work. Also, your Substack, which is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I would have definitely forgot that. Yeah, so the dreammami.com. And um upcoming world building school cohort 2. I like that you called it 2.0. Maybe I'll do that in the future because the cohort thing is like hard to say for me. And also I'm like it's not really, it gives this idea of like separated students that I don't really need. So anyway,
Yeah.
world building
And
school
also
incoming
and also
changes.
not to be confused with year 2 being like a continuation of year 1 either.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So working the things out, never ran a school before, but um that is open for enrollment now. And because the teachings are all going to be pre-recorded
Mm,
and released each Saturday, I'm leaving enrollment open up until the day before. So
mm,
World Building School starts on January 20th.
mhm.
So you
Yeah.
can enroll up until then. And it's an 8-week program. I keep calling it a training program in a way because it's kind of training you in world building. And it's also like intimacy with the planetary ancestors, through, like I said, understanding sect and looking at old schemas and how to apply them to real life. Um, and yeah, so it's transmissions and it's world building labs.
Mm,
So I was gonna offer world building labs last year as like its own thing, but now it's like gonna be what our little like Q&A hot seat coaching playtime calls are.
yeah.
So it's just literally 8 weeks of like our release of transmission or teaching, and then we'll meet the following Wednesday and play with it and
Mhm,
experiment with it and talk about it.
mhm.
So that's what World Building School is, and that's open for enrollment until January 19th, I guess. Um, and uh yeah, my Substack, so bad at swearing, which is arifelix.substack.com. It's called the Dream Realm, and that's my more, as indicated by the name, my like the lunar side of my work.
Mm,
So I do, aside from World Building School, which is just a temporary program, I do one-on-one coaching and sessions. And I release teachings every now and then. And so the dream realm is where I write, which is a big part of my work. And I kind of write through, on the paid subscription, you get this like behind the scenes look at like my personal stories, my personal lore and processes and what I'm working through. But there's also a lot of free content there with world building frameworks and stuff like world building through the houses, world building through the signs I'm working on and stuff like that. Um, I think that's it. Is that it,
mhm.
Jonathan? Jonathan
I
knows my
think
work
that's
better
it.
than I do. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I think that's it. Yeah, I guess I just want to say that I love your kind of one-off teachings as well. So that is always, or some forms of it are
Yeah, I have a
available on
whole
your website.
shop with teachings. Yeah, yeah.
Your
Right on my
library of
site, I have
teachings are
teaching.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate that.
highly
I love
recommend
those little
people.
guys. I love
Well,
little
they're
teachings.
really profound. They're really substantial teachings. Like I remember, I don't know if you still have it up, but Love Exalted was like just
Yes, it's still up.
mind blowing for me when I first signed up. I was like, "What is this?" So yes,
So you had a psychedelic experience.
I
That makes me
did.
happy.
I
That's
did.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, thank you, Ari. Thank you for your work and
Thank
thank
you,
you for your presence.
Jonathan.
This has been such a gift. I appreciate
Thank
you.
you for your work and your presence. I feel so grateful to receive solidarity
Mm,
with you as a world builder. Like I think that's kind of why I like the idea of world building school. It's like getting a bunch of people to like be in solidarity with these efforts, of
mhm.
creating these new worlds and realities together. And so thank you for, I mean, everything, all these beautiful things you say to me. Like, just really soak them in. Thank you for that. But even more so, thank you for being you and coming to this planet at this time and finding me. Like, I'm glad you did that. I have so much love for you, truly.
I have so much love for you too. Thanks, Ari.
Mhm.